Hi subscribers and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be following the topic of SIPP transfer for non-UK residents. Now for anyone who's following our channel will know we deal with a lot of UK clients and also a lot of non-UK resident clients. So this morning I'm joined by Jonathan Laws. Jonathan, you've moved to Richmond now. How's that going?
I have indeed. Yeah, going very well. In fact, enjoying my new office abode. You might see the office dog, as I call him, in the background during it. But yeah, been a good move. Nice transition. Nice area from east to west. Don't ask me about the ordeal of actually getting the move here. Next time I'll get movers. But yeah, no, it was a good trip, and yeah, glad to be here.
So, John, we've discussed this before. SIPPs, international SIPPs, non-UK residents. We want to revisit this topic because it's an inquiry we get a lot from our clients. So what could you say in terms of an update, John, for SIPPs for UK resident and non-UK residents?
Yeah, so kind of, emphasizing what's already kind of happened before. If you've watched any of our previous videos, if you've spoken with any of our advisors, you'll kind of know a lot of people will get in touch because their current SIPP provider, or they've moved abroad and they've got other types of UK pensions and whatnot. They've looked to consolidate, and they can't find any options to help them. The minute they mention they're not UK resident, the SIPP provider wants nothing to do with them. One of the big areas that we think will be more and more prevalent as the years go on is the new budget changes. So they brought out these new rules around inheritance tax and all these kind of onerous obligations that pension trustees now have that just mean it's another layer of additional things that a trustee and a pension administrator has to do for a non-UK resident they don't have to do for a UK resident. And it just gets to the stage where you're like, is the juice worth the squeeze? And those kind of schemes that are, quote unquote, hanging on to allowing, maybe not just only those new joiners, but also keeping the current joiners there, which a lot of the providers have. They kind of say, look, we're closing it for new business, but if you're here before, say la vie, we'll let you carry on. Even if perhaps shouldn't be doing that because there are other kind of issues and limitations with their pension that don't really factor into their mind because they're not limitations if you're a UK resident.
Yeah, understood. And I think that's very true. From what I can see of the IHT liabilities and everything, it's going to become very onerous for trustees. And I think it's going to squeeze the market even more. So, John, for anyone who's an absolute beginner watching today's video, can a non-UK resident have a SIPP?
Yeah, no, of course, absolutely. And in fact, in reality, for those non-UK residents, they should be having a SIPP. There's very little rationale in many cases to not try and keep all your pension assets inside the UK. Doesn't mean there aren't certain cases where there isn't reasons and rationale to move abroad, but no reason at all why a UK person can't have a UK SIPP. A non-UK person can't have a UK SIPP.
And just as a slight detour, not to completely derail this video, but obviously with the autumn budget came news on QROPS as well. So, it's arguable now that SIPP has become even more the best place for non-UK residents. Could you just give our listeners and viewers a bit of a summary of the autumn budget and QROPS SIPP?
Yeah, so as far as the autumn budget that came on the 30th of October last year, feels weird to say last year. The key changes there that came from an expat point of view that again didn't really factor into any of these kind of news bulletins. You wouldn't have read them on the news, certainly the UK news. Was the removal of the ability to transfer to a QROPS in say Malta or Gibraltar for those who live in the European Economic Area. So previously, it was a case of, you've retired to Spain, you've retired to France, Portugal, wherever it may be. If you wanted to, you could use a Maltese QROPS. You could transfer in because there are no QROPS or pensions that reach that criteria in your local country, and everyone just used the Maltese QROPS. Now, however, that is now gone. There wasn't even a consultation period or a kind of phasing in approach. It was day one. That was it. Unless you've done a request previous to that day, that was it for QROPS transfers. Ostensibly, this was kind of a bit of a hammer. They took a hammer when they really needed a scalpel. So what the previous government did inadvertently was, and no, this is one of those sorts of quote unquote loopholes that, was it a loophole, wasn't a loophole, where, because, sometimes you just need confirmation. You think you found something, but sometimes you want to hear it from the horse's mouth, as it were. In regard to those who in the UK who could then transfer a UK pension abroad, because the legislation perfectly allows for someone in the UK to use for example, the Malta QROPS at the time. The idea being that you would then move abroad, but you didn't have to. And then that would allow you to effectively double up on the tax-free cash. So those who, for example, very lucky people who had £1 million in the QROPS and £1 million in the UK pension could, in theory, and basically got confirmed essentially, take £250,000 tax-free cash from the UK pension and £250,000 tax-free cash from the QROPS. Now, obviously, Her Majesty's the government never meant for that to be a case. So the way they went about resolving that was, instead of just, doing what I had done, the really simple approach, which is basically go through the little bit of legislation they have now and scrub out the word UK, that would have solved the problem, because then you could only transfer to Malta if you lived in the European Economic Union, i.e. you'd have to move abroad first to do it. But instead they just completely removed it altogether. So as it currently stands, the only people who will be using new Maltese QROPS, or Gibraltar QROPS for that matter, will be those who live in those two countries, which is obviously they're islands, they're not that big, so that's limited, or those who are kind of moving provider, if they're not very happy with their current provider. Otherwise, that's pretty much it for new business for EEA based QROP schemes. There are other countries like Australia, Canada-ish, where QROPS are still a thing, because a lot of people retire to those countries and can use a local pension. But when we typically think of QROPS, and most expats think of QROPS, you type in QROPS, you're going to get loads of stuff about Malta, and that's basically gone. So that on one hand, it's good because a lot of bad stuff went on in these schemes. But yeah, it has kind of meant that SIPP really is the only option for the vast majority of non-UK residents. But in reality, it should have been the only reason anyway.
Yeah, understood. And could you give viewers a quick snapshot again? There's a lot of terminology in the industry. It's basically a bit of a marketing term back in the day, between the term of a UK SIPP and an international or non-UK resident SIPP. Can you just clarify for people exactly what that means? And to go one step further, or go as many steps further as you want, say for example, like Cameron Jane's portfolio, levels of growth, charges, how would they be affected in comparison to, say, a UK or a non-UK resident SIPP or international SIPP?
Yeah, so essentially there is no difference. It really is a marketing term. The pension is in the UK. It's trusteed, administered in the UK. It's got FCA protections, yada yada yada. They walk and talk the same, the structure is the same. The difference is one has basically marketed itself and geared itself up to specifically deal with, although not only, non-UK residents. So, that means they'll take into account, they'll allow, the ability to work with overseas advisors, because with the FCA rules and passporting in certain countries like the US, where, the rules are pretty clear. If you want advice from in the US, you have to have a US regulated advisor. It doesn't matter where the assets are located. They will allow, in that case, an SEC authorized advisor, in case the Europe, someone regulated in an EEA country, to plug in, give advice on that. But also, they'll be allowing you to invest in multiple currencies. They'll allow you to draw out to a non-UK bank account. That's a huge one. A lot of workplace pensions, especially, just point blank will refuse or aren't allowed to pay out to a non-UK bank account. So that's a big one. The fact that they can actually do it, they've got the insurance terms, the ability, the risk, the compliance department that would allow them to do it. That's a huge one as well. There's other things as well about the fact they are open to non-UK residents. They'll allow survivors pensions, which is where, you pass on your SIPP to someone else, your pension to someone else, i.e. your loved ones. A lot of UK pensions, because they can't open a new one for a non-UK resident, can't do that. So they'll just pay a big lump sum to you, which may be tax-free in the UK, but it's all but certainly going to be fully taxable where you are locally. So that's how they really are. There's no real difference from a structure or legal point of view, but from a practical point of view, there's lots of differences.
And from a Cameron Jane's perspective, say you had two clients, one in the UK, one in France, same risk profile, same amount of money. What would the difference in performance be between the two clients taking, say, a UK SIPP or a non-UK SIPP?
Yeah, so the thing with Cameron James is, and of course, you know Dominic, but one of our big spiels, call it self-righteous, whatever it may be, is that it doesn't really matter where you live. You're going to get the exact same type of service, the exact same investment portfolio, the exact same way of doing things as possible. The only slight difference that will be some of the underlying, trustees and providers, which will be based on your residency and depends on the types of, assets, because sometimes there are different fee schedules that make one cheaper than the other. But otherwise, the fees are very similar. They might be on average slightly lower for our UK resident clients, but that is purely because the economies of scale of the big providers we use, like the AJ Bells of the world, whereas non-UK residents is a smaller market. Sometimes they can be slightly more expensive, but it's not much. Still, the average person in the offshore, or offshore, with Cameron James will be paying a lot lower than the average person will be receiving onshore in the UK, according to what the FCA puts out as the cost of ongoing advice. So overall the fees are much lower than average, regardless of where you live. Although typically they will be slightly more expensive for overseas, just based on the fact that the providers and whatnot you use are smaller, but portfolios are the same. They might be a different currency, denominated in a different currency, because you might be advised to get it into the currency you're going to be spending and withdrawing in retirement. But otherwise, there's absolutely no difference. We make sure any portfolios we use at Cameron James, even if we do update and tinker around with them, which is very rare, that we make sure absolutely every platform we advise, regardless of where you live in the world, will be able to have all of these assets on it. That's a very key thing for us.
Yeah, exactly. So when we're talking with clients about, for example, our 5-year return of our balanced portfolio for a UK client or a non-UK resident client, it's a zero-sum game. The only difference might be, say, for example, the AJ Bell platform, typically 20 basis points to start off with. A non-UK resident platform can sometimes be, say, 30 basis points, so maybe a 10 basis points difference. However, John, not to name any names, but it's also arguable that the international or non-UK resident SIPP market is becoming more competitive. There's new players joining the market, one of which, again, we won't go into names, but one of which has significantly cheaper costs in the industry at the moment.
Yeah, so again, I won't name names, especially as we're still in the not trial phase, but we've used them extensively so far. That it's all been fantastic. But yeah, there is a lot of demand out there to try and bring the UK style approach and economies of scale and the way they do things to the offshore market. Like a lot of these things, if there's not much competition and limited market, there's not much incentive for people to really kind of undercut each other. They're all kind of you know a lot, especially the older providers. It's a bit like some of the a bit like OPEC. They all kind of hover around the same price schedules conveniently. Whereas sometimes an entrant will come in, try and really undercut the market. Sometimes it works. In this case, we seem this provider doesn't, but sometimes it doesn't, which makes me think of Vanguard advice in the UK. So yeah, really good firm at the moment, leveraging old actually Hargreaves Lansdown technology they're using. They basically partnered with Hargreaves Lansdown's old technology partner, and they basically rummage in the back cupboard, and they're basically using an old version of Hargreaves Lansdown, which I picked on very quickly when getting the trial. I went, I've seen that before. So yeah, really good. It's really good to see innovation in the market and actually genuine providers. Not that the ones we don't use, because those are the only types of people we work with, but other entrants in the market who you can kind of see the ethics and wanting to only do business with the good guys, and wanting to get good client outcomes and provide good customer service and provide very fair fee schedules and all the rest of it. It's really good to see, and we're very very happy with how it's all gone so far, and so are our clients. We placed with this firm. So yeah, hopefully onwards and upwards. So that's the way the market's going. There's finally a bit of competition, which is nice to see. I've been at Cameron James. What's that? Christ, it's been a long while. 4.5 years now. And it's there haven't really been. If anything, we've been trimming providers, not adding providers. So it's nice to see one that come in that sells you something, and I'm a natural skeptic anyway when it comes to financial services, and so you, Dominic, and it's a bit like, and then you're like, oh wow, you actually are what you say you are, and even when we look under the hood, the engine's shinier than we thought it was. So yeah, it's really good to see.
And John, could you give a quick summary again for SIPP, non-UK SIPP, the levels of protection which are in place for clients? And obviously, this is something we've had to discuss a lot this year at Cameron James. Anyone familiar with the Bright USA situation and what's happened there in terms of security of assets and stuff? So John, if you could remind viewers and listeners again.
Yeah, so yeah, quite rightly, a lot of people get in touch, not just as you mentioned the Bright situation, but other situations out there where there have been issues with UK pension schemes. You think of the Hartley pensions saga and everything went on there. But when it comes to a UK pension, there are basically two things you need to account on when you're looking at protection and security. One is obviously the pension itself. Now, all UK pensions are FCA regulated. There's no such thing as an offshore SIPP. By offshore, they just mean targeted to people that live offshore. It has to be a UK pension. It has to be authorised by HMRC. It has to have FCA, the pensions regulator scrutiny and all the rest of it. So all UK pensions will always be FCA regulated. And if anything kind of goes wrong at the pension level, that is all technically speaking subject to, all your protections, financial services compensation scheme, the ombudsman, etc. But the second level, and where people get undone, is the, a SIPP is just a wrapper, it can't do anything. So I've got a very needy dog who keeps wanting attention. That's the office dog. He's a good secretary, but you've got the second level here, which is your platform, and what you might see is someone has a platform, your investment option, a platform or a bond. Offshore bond being, an old life assurance style product, typically used for tax efficiency. The tax efficiency don't exist inside the pension because the pension has already got the tax efficiency. So unfortunately, often used by the less scrupulous advisors out there to kind of, quote unquote, bunging commissions and stuff. Although they can, if used in the right way, like a lot of tools, be an incredibly good and low cost product. But unfortunately, years of kind of, misuse, if you want to call it, has left them, their reputation tarnished. So, the option that we would typically advise is an investment platform, which will mimic if you've ever used any sort of brokerage account in the UK, we'll mimic an investment platform. Now, investment platforms don't have to be FCA regulated, just like the offshore bond will be regulated, in the Isle of Man, or sometimes they're in places as far afield as Mauritius. They don't have to be FCA regulated, and a lot of people will take it for granted. Oh, my money's sitting in an account inside the UK pension, it must be FCA regulated. Unfortunately, that is not the case. And that's where you saw right. It was an Australian platform, but there was a custody in Australia, but also they gave custody to the owner and all the sorts of shenanigans that went on there. But again, there are other big household platform names out there that you go, oh, they must be. I know them. They've got a big UK presence. They must be FCA regulated. No, you'll probably find they're regulated in an offshore tax haven, be it Guernsey, Jersey, etc. And they've probably got admin teams all around the world, with a lot of them sticking admin teams in Dubai because of how cheap it is to do it. So, you've got to be really sure when you're doing that, when you're doing your due diligence, you need to say, right, this platform, where are they regulated? Because at Cameron James, for platforms, we will only use FCA regulated platforms. We do not want your money being under the scrutiny of any other financial services jurisdiction other than the UK and the FCA, which they have their faults, but they are far and away the best financial services and most, the best protection, consumer protection of any financial services regulator on the planet, bar none. So that's the key one. FCA regulated SIPP, that's a given, that has to be. But the investment platform, make sure that gets FCA regulated. In the UK, your UK resident, they're all going to be FCA regulated. But offshore, when you live offshore, a lot of these things, even from household names that you might even use, you might even use their products, might not be FCA regulated. So you really got to check. And again, your advisor might not know either. And again, when you're doing due diligence, that's a bit of a flag if your advisor doesn't know your platform's regulated either. So, which is what we've seen. We've kind of said to clients, "Oh, do you know that was that's a Jersey-based platform?" And they go, "Oh no, it's no," and I'm like, "Go check." And of course, not to toot my own horn, but because I know the platform, it was correct. And so that's a really key thing. And a good question.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to FCA regulation, when we're dealing with non-UK resident clients, by default, by them being a non-UK resident client, typically speaking, you'd be using, say, a European or American or other license for dealing with them in their country of residence. However, what do we say to our clients as best practice is yes, as Jonathan said, your SIPP is by default FCA regulated. Your platform may not be FCA regulated. We would always advise you to be using an FCA regulated platform. And thirdly, for your financial advisor, if you're in America or if you're in Dubai or wherever it might be, your financial advisor does not need to be FCA regulated. They may not even be providing your specific advice on that FCA license. However, if your financial advisor is also on the FCA register, as are all our advisors here at Cameron James, it's also a further level of protection. Now, technically, if the advice is provided on, say, an American license, your financial advisor being on the FCA register or not is irrelevant. But it does show best practice in the fact that that financial advisor is working in the UK, applies UK consumer duty and understands best practice in the UK. So again, if you can have your SIPP, your platform and your financial advisor who are all registered with the FCA, irrespective of the advice being provided from there or not, it's certainly best practice. And I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, John, but obviously things do happen in the UK, but the majority of instances, for example, with Bright as well, there was very few clients we came across who had misdoings where they'd been working with an FCA regulated advisor. It was typically non-UK based financial advisors who were no way at all connected with the FCA register, right?
Yeah, correct. I haven't seen any, apart the only kind of times we came across, a client with that, or even, Hartley pensions for that matter as well, who had an FCA regulated advisor, was when an advisor had come in after the fact to try and help sort things out. And invariably, if you don't know this space, you're not going to be that much help. There's limited you can do. And that's correct. What you did see a lot with these kind of, you see a lot of with these kind of, when these scandals go down, is there are a lot of kind of advisors there who might be part of a network that is FCA regulated, and they're sort of very sneakily leveraging the fact that, there's an FCA branch, whatever it may be, to kind of, for want of a better word, hoodwink clients into thinking it's FCA regulated advice or somehow connected, when in reality it's not. So the point you bring up is really good, is the fact that, I'm on the FCA register, you're on the FCA register, I have lots of UK clients. Technically speaking, it's completely irrelevant. If you live in the US and I'm giving you advice and I'm SEC authorized to give you advice, the fact I'm on the FCA regulator, the fact that, Cameron James Limited, gives advice to UK residents and an authorized representative of a UK FCA regulated principal is technically irrelevant. But, and again, we will emphasize that no client will ever sign up with Cameron James thinking, they're getting FCA advice when they're not. We are so clear on that. Make sure, adamant, and you will know exactly how everything is authorized and protected, which is a key thing, because a lot of times, other people out there don't do such a thing intentionally, in my opinion. But we will make sure that you go, right, well, my advisor is on the FCA register, he does have to do all of these things, and our philosophy at Cameron James, as we said at the start of the video, is it doesn't matter where you live. What is the best practice in 2025 now? Still sounds weird to say that. To give financial planning and advice. It's full fat financial planning, it's cash flow modeling, it's taking into account, estate planning and tax planning, and, having a real collaborative approach, building the financial plan. The plan drives the portfolio doesn't drive the plan. And it doesn't matter where you live, we're going to give you the best practice at the moment. The UK is by far and away the highest and strictest level. So we will give you the equivalent of what we give to our UK, clients in terms of service and effort and all the rest of it. And yeah, as you say, it's a level of comfort. It's not technically a level of protection or security, but it is a level of comfort to know that your advisor is there doing all of this, and adhering to all of this, and, you practice what you preach.
Yeah, and I think that any financial advisor who is on the FCA register, in my professional opinion, either their company or themselves are taking their career very professionally. Not to say anyone not on the FCA register isn't taking their career professionally, but it just gives that extra level of security that, okay, if you're a client and dealing with a UK pension, it's just nice to know your financial advisor deals with people in the UK, which is where this pension originated from, and they understand the best practice of the UK. John, I think we've done SIPP, the non-UK residents to death there, but yeah, really good video again, lots of great updates over the course of the past year worked into that. So Jonathan, thank you for joining this morning, and I hope your office helper continues to be very helpful today.
You still want scratches. I can hear them pouring away, but yes.
And as always, viewers and listeners, if you have a UK asset, you're a non-UK resident, you want to understand any more, feel free to get in touch, a conversation with myself, Jonathan, or one of us other senior financial advisors to understand more about your situation. And always remember, reaching out doesn't cost you anything. You don't become a client. There's literally rounds and rounds and rounds of DocuSigns before you get anywhere near close to becoming a paid client of ours. So start a conversation. Don't be afraid to reach out. And if we're the right financial planning firm for you, then brilliant. If not, we can point you in, at least in the right direction of possibly some of the areas to avoid when getting non-UK regulated financial advice. And as always, take care with UK Pension Assets.